On December 11th, 2012, Jennifer Jen Ramsren was reported missing by her husband, Ganesh Remy Ramsren. Remy told authorities that Jen had left their home in New Berlin, New York, between 10 and 11 a.m. to go shopping in Syracuse, but never returned. Concerned about her unexplained absence, Remy called 911 and informed the dispatcher that Jen had not come back and none of their friends had heard from her. He emphasized how unusual this behavior was for his wife and said he was genuinely alarmed. The following day, while speaking with police at the station, Remy used the Find My iPhone feature in an attempt to locate Jen's phone. The app led him and officers to a rural roadside location about 20 miles outside of town, near South Plymouth. Officers searched the area but found nothing of significance. Later that same day, Remy visited the area again on his own, and this time found Jen's iPhone himself. He immediately called 911 to report the discovery. At this point, the case was still classified as a missing person investigation. However, doubts started to surface. 5 days after Jen's disappearance, her red Chrysler minivan was discovered abandoned in an apartment complex parking lot approximately 8 miles from her home. Inside the vehicle, investigators found spots of blood, raising the possibility of foul play. The search came to a devastating end on February 26, 2013, when Jen's naked body was discovered in a remote area. A medical examiner later confirmed her death was the result of a homicide. This marked a formal shift from a missing person case to an active murder investigation. Jennifer and Remy Ramsren were once viewed as a picture of a happy, stable couple. College sweethearts who had built a life together. They were raising 3 children in New Berlin, New York. To outsiders, theirs appeared to be a perfect life. But beneath the surface, the marriage was beginning to fracture. By 2012, emotional distance had grown between them, and both partners were seeking connection elsewhere. Jen had immersed herself in the online world of the role-playing game Kingdoms of Camelot. It was more than a hobby. It became a major part of her life. Within that virtual world, she developed a relationship with another player named Rob, who lived in England. Their interaction remained online, but provided Jen with companionship that seemed lacking at home. At the same time, Remy was keeping a much more dangerous secret. He was having an affair with Jen's closest friend, Eileen Sales. That relationship turned out to be crucial in the investigation. Detectives discovered that Remy and Sales had slept together just 1 day before Jen vanished. Sales would later admit that she intended to end the affair, but Remy had become upset and resistant to her decision. This revelation led investigators to reconsider Remy's behavior and potential motives. His decision to locate Jen's phone himself and his eagerness to speak to the media raised red flags. Combined with the affair, these elements became central to the growing suspicion surrounding Remy's role in Jen's disappearance. With Jennifer's body recovered and Remy's affair with Eileen Sales exposed, investigators began to take a much closer look at Remy's account of what happened on December 11th, 2012. From the beginning, he had claimed that after Jen left for a shopping trip to Syracuse, he went for a run. However, this alibi quickly began to unravel under investigation. Surveillance footage failed to support Remy's claimed route. There was no sign of him along the path he described, raising immediate concerns. Eventually, he was seen on camera arriving at a YMCA, but only later in the day. To detectives, it appeared calculated, an attempt to place himself somewhere public to create the illusion of a consistent timeline. The inconsistencies were enough to raise doubts, but the physical evidence would further weaken his story. A small spot of blood was found on the couple's mattress, and additional traces of blood were discovered on the sweatshirt Remy had worn the day Jen went missing. Investigators concluded that the most likely scenario was that Remy killed Jen at home, transported and dumped her body in a remote area, discarded her phone near a roadside, left a red minivan in an apartment complex parking lot, and then traveled on foot to the YMCA in an attempt to construct an alibi. On May 17th, 2013, Remy was arrested and formally charged with second-degree murder. Despite this, he continued to insist he was innocent. In an interview with Dateline, Remy stated that he had the perfect life, a wife, a girlfriend, children, and claimed he had no reason to harm Jen. Investigator, however, believed the evidence painted a very different picture. In 2014, Ganesh Remy Ramswaran stood trial for the second-degree murder of his wife, Jennifer Ramswaran. Prosecutors presented a narrative centered around motive, deception, and control. They argued that Remy had grown tired of his marriage and wanted to be free to pursue his affair with Eileen Sales. According to them, he viewed Jen as an obstacle to the life he desired and planned to remove her permanently. Among the most compelling testimony came from Remy's longtime best friend. He revealed that Remy had spoken about divorcing Jen and seemed confident he would receive custody of their children. This detail reinforced the prosecution's theory that Remy believed he could rebuild his life with Eileen without the constraints of his marriage. The state also emphasized the calculated nature of Remy's behavior after Jen's disappearance. His decision to find her phone himself and speak openly with the media appeared less like concern and more like an attempt to control the narrative. Physical evidence, including the bloodstains on the mattress and his sweatshirt, further supported the prosecution's version of events. The absence of a credible alibi also weighed heavily against him. Remy took the stand in his own defense. He insisted he was innocent and claimed he still loved both Jen and Eileen. He maintained that he had no reason to harm Jen and described his life before her death as perfect. But the jury was not persuaded. After evaluating the evidence and testimony, they found him guilty of second-degree murder. The judge sentenced him to 25 years to life in prison. The conviction marked what many believed was a final chapter in the case. Yet further legal developments would soon reopen the story. In 2022, nearly a decade after his conviction, Ganesh Remy Ramswaran's legal battle took an unexpected turn. A judge overturned his second-degree murder conviction, citing ineffective legal representation during the original trial. The spotlight fell on Gilberto Garcia, Remy's defense attorney, whose performance was deemed severely inadequate. Garcia, who had never tried a murder case before, reportedly relied on internet searches, using Google, to grasp basic forensic concepts central to the case. His lack of experience became even more evident when he failed to retain expert witnesses and neglected to properly prepare Remy for his testimony on the stand. Perhaps most damaging was Garcia's own closing argument, during which he admitted to the jury that he had questioned Remy's innocence 1,000,000 times. This admission, along with his uncoordinated courtroom strategy, played a key role in the judge's ruling to vacate the conviction. Remy's new defense attorney, David Hammond, pointed to Garcia's handling of the case as not only chaotic but prejudicial. He described the trial as a disaster, especially when Remy, unprepared and unsupported, faced intense cross-examination. Even Ben Bergman, the special prosecutor assigned to the case, agreed that a new trial was warranted. He stated that the legal deficiencies were unlike anything he had ever encountered. Still, Bergman continued to believe in Remy's guilt. He referenced newly discovered voicemails Jen left for an online acquaintance on the day she disappeared, messages that made no mention of a shopping trip. But with key witnesses like lead investigator Richard Cobb no longer alive, the road to a second trial was filled with complications. The reversal did not prove Remy's innocence. It only exposed critical flaws in the system that once convicted him. In 2023, Ganesh Remy Ramswaran accepted a plea deal, avoiding the uncertainty of a second trial. He pleaded guilty to first-degree manslaughter in exchange for a 22-year prison sentence. His legal team considered the agreement strategic, calculating that with good behavior, Remy could be eligible for release in just 8.5 years. Though it marked the end of a long legal process, the plea raised new questions about justice, accountability, and Remy's true state of mind. Despite formally admitting guilt, Remy has never publicly accepted responsibility for Jennifer's death. In a televised Dateline interview following the plea, he made unsettling comments about life behind bars. Referring to prison as a place of freedom, he claimed it was a joke. He spoke freely about accessing cell phones and other contraband, describing an environment that defied public expectations of punishment. His tone was casual, even boastful, void of remorse. Remy's demeanor during the interview stunned many viewers. Journalist Andrea Canning, who conducted the interview, later described him as one of the most fascinating people she had ever met. Whether that fascination stemmed from his calculated denial, his emotional detachment, or a deeper sense of arrogance remains ambiguous. This final chapter of the case does not offer closure. Instead, it presents a disturbing paradox: a brutal crime followed by conviction, a confession, and yet a man who remains curiously unaffected. The justice system may have rendered its verdict, but emotional justice appears far less certain. Jennifer Ramsden was a mother of 3, a wife, and a daughter. Her life was cut short in a senseless act of violence that left deep scars on everyone who loved her. Her children were forced to grow up without their mother, and her family was left to grieve in the shadow of a complex and painful legal battle. What began as a missing person case evolved into a murder investigation, a high-profile trial, and ultimately, a plea deal that many viewed as a compromise of justice. Remy Ramsden, now serving time for manslaughter, remains a divisive figure. While prosecutors, investigators, and many who follow the case still firmly believe in his guilt, the reduction of the charge of murder to manslaughter left Jen's family with a sense that the justice system had failed to fully recognize the gravity of her death. His prison interviews, in which he minimized the severity of incarceration and denied responsibility, have only added to that pain. This case goes beyond a tragic crime within a family. It highlights broader concerns about legal competence, the integrity of investigations, and how plea deals can shift the public's perception of justice. The story of Jennifer Ramsden serves as a reminder of how fragile justice can be, even in cases with overwhelming evidence and strong suspicions. There is no neat conclusion here. Only loss, lingering questions, and a system that punished, but did not fully answer for a life destroyed. 16-year-old Suzanne Capper was lured to Jean Powell's home in Mostyn, Manchester, on December 7, 1992. Upon arrival, she was immediately ambushed by Glenn Powell and Anthony Dudson. The 2 men forcibly restrained her as Glenn shaved off her head and eyebrows. Suzanne was then ordered to clean up the hair and dispose of it in a bin. Following this, a plastic bag was placed over her head, and she was struck repeatedly on the head. Once the bag was removed, Jean Powell and Bernadette McNeely kicked her while she lay curled on the floor. The beating escalated when the 2 women took turns hitting Suzanne with a 3-foot-long wooden instrument and a belt. She was then taken to the bathroom and forced to shave off her pubic hair. This act was described by her attackers as a form of ritual humiliation, supposedly in retaliation for a situation involving Dudson and McNeely. The cruelty did not end there. That night, Jean Powell locked Suzanne inside a cupboard, initiating a 7-day period of captivity and torture. This event marked the beginning of one of the most brutal and senseless crimes in recent UK history. Suzanne, a teenager with her life ahead of her, was subjected to dehumanizing abuse that stripped away her dignity. Her captors showed no empathy, only a relentless drive to dominate, humiliate, and inflict pain. The acts committed on that first night set the tone for the following week, during which Suzanne would endure unimaginable suffering at the hands of those she once knew. The following morning, Suzanne was moved upstairs and locked in another cupboard. Her captors became concerned that Jean and Bernadette's 6 children were being disturbed by Suzanne's cries. As a result, she was transferred to Bernadette McNeely's house. There, Suzanne's ordeal escalated to even more horrifying levels. She was tied spread-eagle to an upturned bed using electrical flex in a back room. From that point forward, her abuse intensified with methodical cruelty. Over the next 5 days, Suzanne was subjected to a relentless cycle of torture. She was regularly beaten, injected with amphetamines, and burned with cigarettes. Psychological torment accompanied the physical brutality. Rave music was blasted into her ears through headphones at maximum volume. Most disturbingly, the track, "Hi, I'm Chucky, Wanna Play?" containing sound bites from the horror film Child's Play, was played repeatedly. Before each new round of abuse, Bernadette McNeely would initiate the session by announcing, "Chucky's coming to play." Suzanne lay tied down, unable to move or escape, isolated in a room filled with noise, pain, and fear. Her captors exercised complete control over her body and mind, showing no remorse or hesitation. The mixture of drugging, beating, and sensory torture formed a deliberate campaign to break her spirit. This section of Suzanne's captivity highlighted not only physical violence, but a calculated effort to dehumanize her. Her attackers used music, restraints, and repeated abuse as instruments of psychological warfare. The house where she was held became a chamber of terror, detached from the outside world, where cruelty flourished unchecked. During Suzanne's captivity, two additional individuals, Clifford Pook and Jeffrey Lee, visited Bernadette McNeely's house and directly witnessed her condition. Suzanne was blindfolded, gagged, and tied to the upturned bed. She had been lying in her own urine and feces for several days, unable to move or clean herself. The sight was horrific. Yet instead of helping her, the visitors escalated the abuse. Suzanne was dragged to the bathroom and placed into a bath filled with concentrated disinfectant. A stiff brush was then used to scrub her skin with such force that it removed layers of flesh. The pain she endured during this act was unimaginable, yet the torment did not end there. In one of the most gruesome episodes of her captivity, Clifford Pook used pliers to forcibly extract two of Suzanne's teeth. This horrific act was later described by Anthony Dodson, who stood nearby with Jean Powell and Bernadette. Pook removed Suzanne's gag, told her to open her mouth, and began smashing her teeth with the pliers. After repeated strikes and yanking, he finally succeeded in pulling two teeth. According to Dodson, Pook laughed during the act and later kept the extracted teeth in his home as grotesque trophies. This section underscores how the violence against Suzanne was not limited to her initial captors. Others became involved, either actively participating or passively allowing it to continue. It revealed a chilling level of complicity and a complete disregard for human suffering. Suzanne's world had narrowed to a single room, visited only by those who came to inflict more harm. In the early hours of December 14, 1992, Suzanne's captors decided to dispose of her. She was forced into the boot of a stolen white Fiat Panda and driven approximately 15 miles to Werneth Low, located near Stockport. In the car were Bernadette McNeely, Jean Powell, Glenn Powell, and Anthony Dodson. Bernadette reportedly giggled during the drive. Once they arrived at a secluded bramble-covered embankment, Suzanne was pushed down into the undergrowth. Bernadette attempted to ignite petrol poured over Suzanne, but struggled to do so. Glenn Powell and Dodson then intervened, making multiple attempts to start the fire. Eventually, they succeeded in setting Suzanne alight. During this final act of unimaginable cruelty, Bernadette began to sing lyrics from the Tramp's song Disco Inferno, repeating, "Burn, baby, burn." As Suzanne burned, her attackers left her alone in the darkness. They made no effort to ensure she was dead. The intention was clear. They wanted her gone, erased from their world. But against all odds, Suzanne's body did not give up. This final ordeal represents the most devastating act of violence in the entire sequence of abuse. After 7 days of torture, Suzanne was discarded like trash and set on fire while still alive. The inhumanity shown in this act defies comprehension. It was not a spontaneous act of rage, but a coordinated, chillingly executed decision to eliminate a helpless victim. It demonstrated the extent to which empathy and morality had vanished among those involved. Despite burns covering 80% of her body, Suzanne Capper defied death one final time. After her attackers fled, she managed to crawl out of the brambles and climb back up the embankment. Incredibly, she staggered for nearly a quarter of a mile to reach Comstall Road. At 6:10 a.m., Barry Sutcliffe and two colleagues were driving to work when they found Suzanne. Horrified by her condition, they immediately sought help from a nearby house. There, Michael and Margaret Coop answered the door. Suzanne was in an unimaginable state. Michael described her hands as looking like ash and her legs as resembling raw meat. Despite her condition, Suzanne remained polite, constantly thanking Margaret for her assistance. Margaret later recounted how she instinctively tried to hug Suzanne, only for the girl to recoil, her injuries too severe for physical contact. Her head was completely shaved, her face swollen, and almost unrecognizable. Yet her will to survive had carried her through. She had no shoes, her feet charred from fire, and she could not hold a glass of water on her own due to the injuries to her hands. This section of Suzanne's story is as heartbreaking as it is powerful. It reflects her extraordinary resilience and determination to live, even after enduring a level of suffering that defies belief. The humanity shown by Barry Sutcliffe and the Coops in her moment of need stands in stark contrast to the cruelty she had endured. Suzanne's escape was not just a physical act. It was a final act of resistance against those who had tried to destroy her. Suzanne was rushed to Withington Hospital, where medical staff began emergency treatment. Despite the severity of her injuries, she remained conscious long enough to identify her attackers. She named all 6 individuals involved and gave police the address of Jean and Glenn Powell. Her information became the cornerstone of the investigation. Suzanne's injuries were so severe that her mother and stepfather could not recognize her. Her head had been shaved, her face was swollen, and her body was covered in burns. The only way she could be positively identified was through a partial fingerprint taken from her thumb, the only part of her hand not completely destroyed by fire. Shortly after providing her statement, Suzanne slipped into a coma. Despite the best efforts of doctors and nurses, she succumbed to multiple organ failure and died on December 18, 1992, 4 days after being set alight. Her death marked the end of a week-long ordeal that remains among the most disturbing crimes in modern British history. Suzanne's bravery in the face of death ensured that justice could be pursued. She did not die in silence. She used her final strength to make sure her attackers were named and brought to account. The medical professionals who tried to save her witnessed firsthand the extent of human cruelty and the resilience of a young girl determined to survive. Her final moments were marked by unimaginable pain, but also by purpose. Suzanne Capper's voice was heard, even as her life slipped away. Her death did not mark the end of the story. It marked the beginning of a fight for justice that would follow. Following Suzanne Capper's death, Greater Manchester Police acted swiftly. Detective Inspector Peter Wall led the investigation. On the morning of December 14, 1992, at 7:30 a.m., officers secured 97 Langworthy Road and arrested all occupants. The horror of the case unfolded rapidly. As the evidence mounted, Detective Wall remarked, "As the story began to unfold, we just couldn't believe it." Forensic examination revealed disturbing details. Hair samples were recovered from an outdoor waste container. Tools used to extract Suzanne's teeth were found stored alongside Christmas decorations. So deeply moved were the officers that they collectively paid for flowers to be sent to Suzanne's hospital bed. Court proceedings began on November 16, 1993, lasting 22 days. Throughout the trial, the jury was visibly shaken, especially during descriptions of the torture Suzanne endured. Each defendant offered conflicting accounts, attempting to shift blame, but the prosecution presented overwhelming evidence. After 9 hours and 52 minutes of deliberation, the jury delivered guilty verdicts on December 16th. Jean Powell, Bernadette McNeely, and Glenn Powell received life sentences with minimum terms of 25 years. Anthony Dudson, who was 16 at the time, received a reduced sentence of 16 years. Clifford Pook and Jeffrey Lee were sentenced to 15 and 12 years, respectively. As the sentences were announced, Suzanne's family cried out in relief, shouting, "Yes! Yes!" Over time, all 6 individuals were released on parole. Their return to society has sparked public outrage and reignited debates around sentencing for violent crimes. For Suzanne's family, each release reopened deep emotional wounds. The case of Suzanne Capper continues to stand as one of the UK's most disturbing crimes. Its legal legacy still referenced today. Despite her death, Suzanne ensured her killers were named, and her voice helped bring them to justice.